Hello fellow space engineers, this is Marcelo from ACFN Gaming, and today I want to address the subject of ship classification and recognition in the universe of space engineers. But before we begin, let's make a few disclaimers. First of all, this classification system is exclusive to our faction. It's not pretended to be a universal rule, so feel free to take some advice from it or ignore it completely. Secondly, in our system, the intent and mission of the ship actually is the main reason to classify them as X or Y class. Third, the ships are designed and meant to function in Survival 1X. We chose Survival 1X because it's the game mode that actually brings more options to the table when it comes to tactics, especially because you have to consider logistics in the mix. And last but not least, the major contributors to this classification system are my friends Seukunen and Seth. Now, these are the frigate hulls of the MTF. They fit the broad category of frigate, meaning a ship that is not a capital, taking into consideration the broader definition of the term frigate, which is still used in some navies today to describe ships other than aircraft carriers. From that concept originates the expression frigate navy, which is used to refer to a navy that, despite having really powerful surface combatants, it lacks the firepower and projection abilities that larger navies have with their aircraft carriers. At the beginning of our scale, we have the Corvette, which we define as the smallest grid that can carry a jump drive. The Corvette is the most common type of warship that you're gonna encounter in multiplayer servers, especially because it's a cheap craft to build and it can also be transformed from one of the vanilla NPC trading ships. When acting alone, this craft performs patrol duties and as well as scouting duties. When acting as part of a battle group, its main goal is harassing larger enemy ships by taking down their turrets. The Corvette can achieve this because it has a higher delta V, but at the same time it lacks the capacity and firepower to fully disable a larger ship. On the other hand, it's really good at the goalkeeping role by destroying player-made weapons that are threatening or closing fast into larger capital ships. For that reason, the Corvette's main targets are fighters and other corvettes, and its bigger threat or predator are frigates and destroyers. Moving upwards in the scale, we have the frigate. The frigate is also one of those ships that are going to be fairly common in multiplayer servers, and in most cases, it may be the largest warship that you may encounter in any server. Now, that being said, larger ships can be built in survival or even encountered in multiplayer servers if it is a dedicated faction warfare. The definition of the term frigate has varied throughout the ages, but to avoid confusion, we're going to stick with the common definition of a frigate for most navies today, which is that of a lighter, more economical escort ship that can be detached or sent out into cruising missions on her own when the firepower of a larger classification of ship is not needed. In the universe of space engineers, when it comes to battle group assignment, the mission of a frigate, or let's say the main occupation of this type of ship, is going to be escort. It can be paired up in with corvettes, as you usually find it in servers, or it can be paired up with larger vessels like destroyers or cruisers. And her role varies depending on the composition of said battle group, in the way that it can act as a leader for a squadron of corvettes, or as a flanker combatant when it's attached to a larger vessel like a destroyer. As with the Corvette, this ship is going to excel at anti-fighter defense. Though it may not be able to chase down fighters, when information or flying, let's say in a more static role, is going to be a fearsome opponent for a squadron of fighters. So it's going to be particularly good at taking down small grid ships, as well as corvettes, though it can do a lot of frigates, it's going to have a harder time, so its, let's say, its biggest threat is going to be the destroyer or the cruiser. Next up, we have the destroyer. The destroyer being exactly in the middle range of our fleet arrangement here is going to be the workhorse of the MTF. Traditionally, the destroyer is a class of ship that evolved rapidly since its inception. The first destroyers were classified as torpedo boat destroyers, that were larger torpedo boats themselves, powered by a bigger power plant that enabled them to intercept or chase down said torpedo boats and destroy them with guns. Then, over the course of the Second World War, and especially during the Cold War, the class grew exponentially to form the backbone of many navies today. And in those specifically designed as frigate navies, the ones that don't possess aircraft carrier, usually the destroyer is the biggest class of warship that they possess. Being a mid-range, sometimes the destroyer is hard to classify. In some multiplayer servers, you're gonna encounter super heavy frigates that could be considered destroyers, and at the same time, you can encounter even larger ships that no longer quite well fit the category of cruiser, but retaining some of its characteristics. Our particular destroyer here is on the heavy side, and for that reason, some of our friends can even consider it a pocket cruiser. But the one defining factor that has to remain above all is the offensive capacity of this ship class. So for that reason, the main mission that this type of ship is going to perform is of the offensive kind. It's a class of ship that can very well punch down, which means destroy anything that is underneath it, and at the same time destroy or at least heavily cripple larger combatants by the use of its fixed weaponry, the fighters or the small drones it carries, and particularly the player-made torpedoes. So when it comes to predators and prey, the destroyer is going to be able to predate on special frigates and corvettes quite easily, but it has to be accompanied by at least one other class of ship like a frigate to destroy a larger combatant. So the biggest threat to the ship is going to be cruisers and above, especially if encountered in single combat. Now, last but not least, in our frigate lineup, we have the cruiser. And at this point, we have to reopen or at least mention the debate of the cruiser being a subcapital ship or a capital ship in her own right. For most intents and purposes, this size of vessel and this classification of vessel is used in Space Engineer servers as a capital ship, because its role ends up being more strategic than that of the old cruising mission that this vessel was supposed to perform. So its main role is that of control of space through firepower and defense, though the cruiser is definitely the one that holds the most offensive firepower. Its capabilities are best exploited while using defensively, especially when it comes to strategic locations like resource-rich asteroids or areas about planets. This class of ship with its weapons is going to have an easy time taking on anything that is around a frigate or destroyer class. But that being said, it's going to have more difficulty tracking, leading and destroying a Corvette size large grid. Surprisingly enough, this ship is quite effective against fighters due to the amount of turrets that it can mount. But at the same time, player-made weapons that are launched by those fighters can easily cripple them quite badly, especially the ones that use scripts for guidance. For that reason, this ship is best utilized as the center of a fleet, especially when used offensively. It's advised to accompany it with at least one destroyer or frigate, and or a couple or even a larger number of corvettes. We have to note that we designed our particular cruiser here to combine the offensive firepower of 3 destroyers and the defensive firepower of 2 frigates. It also has 2 refineries, an array of assemblers, and a sizable hangar. It's also equipped with a quadruple vertical launch system cell for 4 player-made torpedoes. Given those characteristics combined, this ship can very well replace a carrier when it comes to utility, and even a so-called battleship, at least in the way Space Engineers is played. Well, that is all for now, Space Engineers. I hope you have enjoyed this general overview of ship classifications. In further videos, we're going to be addressing the ship classes below and above the ones that we discussed here today, namely fast attack craft or patrol boats, and carriers, in which we will discuss its controversial nature and practical use in the game. So have a good day and keep playing.